Ken, please tell us more about the Shingo approach.
Let me start off and discuss for just a moment the mission of the Shingo Institute. I really want to emphasize that we exist to improve the process of improvement. That's really our focus. We're all about not only helping people improve, but also to get better at improvement. And we don't think as an institute that people should have to take 70 years to get to the point where Toyota is at, for example. That could be done in 10 if done smartly, and if we benchmark against each other and learn from the best of the best. And so we help in that mission by doing research. We provide teaching materials. We do assessments. I think we're probably best known for the Shingo Prize. And then we recognize those recipients and allow others to learn from them. So that helps everybody throughout the world sustain world-class results. We're named after, for those who may not be aware of it, we're named after the Japanese industrial engineer Shigeo Shingo. He was a consultant that was hired by Toyota to help them develop the Toyota production system. There's one famous reference to him where Taiichi Ohno said, "Shingo's my sensei." It's interesting the two didn't always agree on things, and that's fine because a good debate fleshes out issues in ways that maybe we wouldn't be aware of them otherwise. Shingo wrote 17 different books, 7 of which have been translated into English, which are up on the slide. But he's famous for introducing concepts such as poka-yoke, that's a Shingoism. SMED, or single minute exchange of dai, is another Shingoism. A term that we now refer to as one-piece flow, he called non-stock production. And so he introduced the concept of one-piece flow, but he used a different title for it. He used the idea of source inspection as a way of controlling quality at the source and so on. These are all innovations that Shingo brought to the table, and that's why we're honored to be named after him. We started the Shingo Prize in 1988, so we're 32 years into administering the Shingo Prize. And here are some of the highlights from the history of the Shingo Institute. Let me just share with you some recent prize recipients. You might note that initially the Shingo Prize was mainly a manufacturing recognition award, and it was mainly North America. But as you scan through some of the recipients, you'll notice that there are still some in the Americas, but most of them are not. Right now, about 70% of our recipients are outside of the United States, and several of them are in Europe, as you can see. These are some historical recipients, and I'm going to talk about some of these because we've done a lot of work with them over the years. So that brings me to poll number 1, and I think Emma is going to send this out, but what country has the most Shingo Award recipients per capita?
Okay, I'm just going to launch that for you, Ken.
Okay, thank you, Emma.
Okay, if you can please select the USA, 7% Mexico, 20% Japan, 41% Ireland, and 7% Brazil.
Excellent. So 40% of you got it right. It is Ireland, and it's not even close. The first Irish recipient was in 2011, but since then they have had many, and so many I can't even count them, but well more than, I think the last time I counted was about 17 recipients. It's a country, as you know, of just under 5 million people, and so it has an extremely high number of recipients per capita, and about 10 times the closest competitor, which is, and I didn't put this up here, but the one that has the most award recipients per capita in the number 2 place is none of the above. It's Costa Rica. And I bring that up to point out that the Shingo Prize has really become a true global standard. This is a map showing the different countries where we have had award recipients. You can see that most of the countries of Europe have had an award recipient, and all of North America, Brazil, several countries throughout Asia, and so on. So it has become a true global standard, and we're rather proud of that, and think it's been influential in helping companies improve their process of improvement. I want to go over a little bit more history. During the first 15 years of the Shingo Prize, we had a number of organizations receive a prize, and some of them, but not all of them, matter of fact, most of them did not, but some of them kept getting better and better and still continue to get better and better to this day. And they might, for their sustainability, one might consider them best of the best because of that sustained improvement that they've been able to achieve. Unfortunately, a majority of the Shingo Prize recipients from the first 15 years peaked out at a certain point and then deteriorated in their performance. And some of them deteriorated so badly that people would come to us and say things like, "You gave them a Shingo Prize? Have you seen how bad they are?" And that was very concerning to us. And so we launched, in 2003, we launched a research study that resulted a few years later in the introduction of what we now call the Shingo model. But in our findings in that research, I'd like to just ask, a question. There was clearly that our model was, we looked at companies to see if they had good lean systems, good lean tools, and were they getting good results. And that was really all they needed to have to be able to get a Shingo Prize. We knew something was missing, otherwise we couldn't explain the deterioration that was happening after receiving the Shingo Prize. And so, what was missing? So here's poll number 2. What do you think was missing when we did our research from the organizations, when we compared the organizations that could not sustain their improvement efforts versus those that were able to sustain their improvement efforts? What was missing in those companies?
Okay, so that poll's been launched, Ken. Engagement, 6% humble leadership, 2% ideal behaviors, 22% culture, and 61% all of the above.
And the 61% have it right. So what we found, let me go down here to the next. There we go. So what we found is that in the organizations that were not able to continue their improvements, we found that largely they had a group of people, either managers or engineers, that were driving the improvement efforts, and there was some sort of a changeover. They never succeeded in engaging the people. So clearly employee engagement was part of it. They focused on results more than they focused on changing the behaviors of the people to drive those results. And so the people didn't know how they were getting the results. They just knew that they were doing what they were told to do. And then when that direction changed, they weren't able to sustain it. What we found in the organizations that kept getting better and keep getting better and better is they focused on that culture, the behaviors. They focused on employee engagement. The leaders were open to the ideas of the people and solicited the input and engagement of the people. So yes, it was definitely an all of the above, but we put that in terms of culture. Because culture is an all-encompassing word besides being perhaps a more specific word. But in this case, culture, and we define culture as the cumulative behaviors of all the people. Don't tell us what you believe, but let us see what you do. And that will tell us what your culture is all about. And if you're engaging the people, that's that's a key part of the culture. If you are listening to the people as a humble leader, that's a key part of the culture, and so on. So we found that all of the organizations that kept getting better and better had this culture of employee engagement and respecting the people and listening to them. So let's do a little predicting behaviors. What does it look like if you have a culture of, let's say, fear? People are afraid for their jobs. And that. Just think for a moment about what does that mean. And maybe compare that to what does it look like if you have a culture of trust. I find trust to be one of the most important parts of culture, because if you trust people, you don't waste time trying to figure out their motives. And, why is he telling me to do that? is he just trying to bury me or trying to? If you trust people, you can act and act quickly, and you don't have that personal time waste that goes along with not trusting. If you fear people's motives, if you fear for your safety, if you fear for, you don't act. You try to figure out how you can become safe, and you don't worry about improving the organization at all. And I'd like to just focus on one of my favorite topics of firefighting. We've got a firefighter, so I want to do a little bit of a poll here. Who is the best firefighter? The hero who stands up and bravely puts out the fire, or the person who diligently prevents the fire from ever occurring?
Okay, so 95% voted the person who prevents the fire from ever occurring, and then 5% the hero who stands up bravely and puts out the fire.
Okay, so we tend to have a way of celebrating the hero and not celebrating the person who diligently prevents the fire from ever occurring, but it's better to never have a fire than to have to put one out. And the problem is, if you have a firefighting culture, is you reward the firefighters and they thrive on the fires, and so therefore they don't worry about preventing them. They just worry about continuing to put them out, and it creates the wrong kind of culture and the kind of culture that doesn't lead to sustained excellence. So 95%, good job. Let's talk about some of the reasons why the 5% might need to rethink that. So in our research that we did starting in 2003 that led to the publication of the new Shingo model, we came up with 3 big things. And these are things we learned primarily from the companies that kept getting better and better. These are the best of the best companies, and we found some important consistencies in what they did and how they did it. And so we put these into what we call 3 insights, and let me just share those insights with you. Insight number 1 is that ideal results require ideal behavior. Let me give you an example of that. We'd be talking to one of these companies, and they say, we don't really worry about results anymore because we've worked on figuring out what drives those results, and so we track the behaviors or the actions that lead to those results, and we know if we do well on the leading controls that we have, the results will come. And an example that one of the leaders told us was, let me just use safety. In the U.S., we use the term recordables. That means if somebody's hurt on the job, you have to record it and then report it to OSHA. And if somebody misses days of work because they were hurt on the job, you have to record that and report it to OSHA. So we use the term recordables. I don't know if that's a universal term, probably not. But at any rate, we track recordables because we have to, but what we really are worried about is how many near misses are we seeing, and then error proofing so that near miss can never turn into something that harms somebody and results in them having to miss work. Or we track the number of error proofing activities that are actually implemented. We track those things up front so we don't have to worry about people getting hurt on the job. That's what we mean by ideal results, the kinds of behaviors that lead to the results you want to get. So ideal results require ideal behavior. And the second insight we gained is all of the organizations that were getting better and better and driving that improvement over a long period of time had a clear purpose in their organization that people understood, that people bought into, that they were excited about. It helped motivate them to get up in the morning, you name it. They had a clear purpose. But the leaders of the organization also told us not only did they have a clear purpose, which we could go verify as we did an assessment of their organization. And so they knew what the right thing to do was. But what we also found is that if they don't change what they do to make it easy for people to do the right thing and make it hard for people to do the wrong thing, then people would give up trying to do the right thing because they'd say management doesn't care, because they still make us do it the wrong thing the easy way and the right thing the hard way. What the leaders told us is we have to make it easy for them to do the right thing. And the way they did that was through the systems that drive the behaviors within the organization. And so, an example, instead of doing a performance review, once a year, which is typical and the legal way of doing it, or twice a year, whatever you might have in your organization, they built a recognition system that rewarded people doing the right things the right way right then and there. They didn't wait for a 6-month review or an annual review to be able to tell people or recognize them and reward them. They had a system that would encourage that right kind of behavior right then and there, that was timely and meaningful and public and so on. So that's just an example of how they would change it so it made it easy for people to do the right thing and hard for them to do the wrong thing. And we put that insight into our second insight: purpose and systems drive behavior. So let's talk when we talk systems, let's talk for just a minute about what we mean. This is kind of a little bit of a definition. As we have researched organizations, we find that every organization has at least 3 different kinds of systems. They have the work systems where the actual work is done. If you're a manufacturing facility, you're making a product. This is the actual making of the product you sell. Or if you're a service organization, the actual work going into the service that you provide. And there are also supporting systems, and we use the title improvement systems. But what we mean by that are systems such as a training system to get the people so they can do their work better. You have a hiring system, onboarding system. Those are all things that could be supplementing this improvement system. And then there's also management systems, and management systems would be things like the budget, the budgeting system you have, or the strategy deployment system as you try to get people aligned around certain goals and certain improvement targets. So we found that there's at least 3 different kinds of systems in every organization. We found that every system has to have a leader, has to have a clear objective, or to use Deming's term for it, an aim, and then also had to have at least 5 tools in order to work effectively. And what we find as examiners is a lot of the systems that people have are missing one of the essential tools that are part of an effective system. And I thought back to the time I joined the university and the Shingo Institute 12 years ago. And prior to that, I spent 30 years in industry, all in manufacturing. And as we were doing this research and I was looking back on it, and I thought about the different things that I did that didn't work, I could go back and say, we didn't have a feedback loop. So I didn't know whether the system was functioning and achieving what I wanted it to anyway. And so the system could have been improved by having a feedback loop and then acting on the feedback I could have been getting when I didn't get it. That's just an example of what happens when the system isn't working the way it's supposed to work. Usually it's because you're missing one of the essential tools. So I add that just for definition purposes so you understand what I mean when I say systems drive behavior. The third insight that we have when we gained this from talking to the companies that were driving improvement over time is that principles inform ideal behavior. So we'd ask them, why did you do that? Why did you make that improvement? Why did you do your improvement that way? And they kept giving us reasons for that. And we collected all those different reasons, and we found some real consistency between what those great organizations were doing. And so we put those into those reasons, if you will, that reason why. Why did we do that? We put them into what we call principles. And we borrowed that from the 7 Habits guy, Stephen Covey, who defined a principle as something that is universal, meaning it's true everywhere. It's true in China, it's true anywhere in Europe, it's true in America, it's true in Japan. It's universal. And the second thing that a principle is timeless. It was true thousands of years ago, it will be true thousands of years from now. And there are consequences associated with following that principle or not following that principle. And the consequence typically in an organizational excellence point of view is you're not able to get something that you could have got had you followed that principle. So it's more of an omission, or a consequence of omission, than it is a consequence of too much negativity, perhaps. But there is always a reason to do something, and that if you follow that principle, it will produce some sort of good outcome for you. We put together a new Shingo model, and you can see we still have systems, tools, and results, but we added the behavioral piece, and we called that culture, and we added the guiding principles. And we decided it was easier to teach and assess principles, or the effectiveness of principles, if we put them into different dimensions. So we divided the principles into 3 different dimensions. One is cultural enablers. How do you create the right kind of culture? The second dimension is continuous improvement. These are the principles that guide the actual improvement process. And then the third dimension is enterprise alignment. How do you get all of your improvement efforts focused on something? And in this case, it's a focus on the customer and focus on the good of the whole organization. We created 10 different principles, 2 of them in the cultural enablers, 5 in continuous improvement, and 3 in enterprise alignment. And they're up on the screen. I'm not going to repeat them, but I'd like to talk about each of the dimensions and mention some of the things that are important in each dimension. So let me just start with a minute of cultural enablers. We have 2 principles: respect every individual and lead with humility. We find that there are other concepts that are critical to those 2 principles. And let me just talk a little bit about safety. Especially in the midst of a pandemic, this is a huge issue. How do we keep our people safe if we have to make them work? This is especially true for healthcare workers, and I don't know if we have any healthcare professionals on the call today. I have been troubled, to say the least, by, and I'm most familiar with the statistics in America, but last I heard we had well over 80,000 healthcare workers who were infected on the job. We have several hundred who have died as a result of catching an infection on the job. We have not kept our healthcare workers safe. And yet there are some examples of some terrific hospitals who have focused on creating a safe environment. One of them is in downtown Brooklyn, which was the hottest of the hot spots in America, who over the course of the hottest of the hot times, when they were lacking protection equipment that should have been provided, they still managed the situation so that only one of their healthcare workers was infected on the job. They did it because they cared about their people, they respected their people, and they created a safe environment compared to the unsafe environment in many hospitals throughout America. And so I say that because when someone is worried about their safety, they cannot focus on improvement. They can only worry about how can they be safe. They're worried about protecting themselves, and you can't enable the improvements until you create a safe environment. And that is one huge aspect of respecting every individual. These 2 principles go together because if you don't listen to what people are saying, once they get safe, the single most important reason people get engaged is based upon whether or not the leaders listen to them. And leaders listening to them is the key to lead with humility. So the 2 go hand in hand. They're intertwined. It's also important to develop and train people so that they can be engaged. Continuous improvement principles, we have 5 of them. And we also have several supporting concepts, as you can see across the bottom of the slide. Let me just talk about one in particular: seek perfection. This is really one where we borrow Shingo's terminology. He was a person who believed that we could perfectly eliminate defects through poke-yoke and quality at the source. He also believed you can perfectly eliminate inventory. You can perfectly eliminate equipment breakdowns. You can perfectly eliminate safety problems, all through error proofing or making sure you maintain your equipment properly and so on. More than anybody else, throughout the excellence just means you're doing a great job. but of course we're going to have some defects. He rejected that kind of thinking, and so do we at the Shingo Institute. We can be perfect, and that doesn't mean it's going to be easy, and it may take us many, many years to get there, and maybe many, many innovations to improve our processes so that we can get there, but you can get there. A lot of the important concepts that support this, I just want to emphasize one as an example, and that's go and observe. We are real advocates of you have to be able to observe, and in a virtual environment that we've experienced the last 6 to 8 months or so, we found we've been pleasantly surprised at how effectively we can go and observe using virtual tools. And I had my doubts that we could do that effectively, and what we're finding is, yeah, it can actually be really good, and I've been impressed with how effective it can be. But there is no substitute for seeing the problem. Even if you're seeing it live or you're seeing it virtually, you still have to see the problem to understand it. And so I want to make sure that you understand, we're a fan of go and observe even when you can't do it physically. Enterprise alignment, we have 3 principles. Create value for the customer, create constancy of purpose, and think systemically. We borrowed the wording create constancy of purpose directly from Deming. As many of you may realize, it's the first of his 14 points. I want to just mention one thing. One principle I want to talk about is think systemically, not think systematically. Systematic thinking is good too. That's not one of the principles. What we mean by think systemically is think of the whole system, think of the whole organization, think of the whole value stream, think of how one thing impacts another. And what we see as Shingo examiners is way too often people make an improvement over here that does harm over there. And this is even in the best companies. We still see this principle as something that people struggle to understand. How can we improve the whole by improving what we're doing is more important than how can we improve what we're doing and hope it helps the whole. We need to think about the whole and how then we can make the whole better, and then think about what individual steps we might be able to make. Here's a great quote from Shingo, and I love it. I mentioned that we developed curriculum to be able to teach people. I'm guessing that many of you have been through one or more of our workshops. We start with a Discover Excellence workshop, which is in curriculum terminology, we call it a breadth course, where you get the whole model but not real deep. We've found that systems is something that people misunderstand and don't. So we developed a workshop around that. We recommend those 2 before doing the others. The others are more the deep dives into different aspects of improvement on a dimension by dimension basis. And then our final workshop is Build Excellence. It's our capstone workshop where we bring everything together and help people learn how to implement. We don't teach workshops ourselves. At the Shingo Institute, we develop curriculum, but we license many partners around the world to do that. We have several partners that are active in Europe. Most of them focus on individual countries within Europe. We also have, I've included England here in Europe. I don't know if that's still politically correct to do so. I put SA Partners at the top left because that's a company that Peter founded and was associated with for many, many decades. And Peter just recently retired from SA Partners, but SA Partners continues to be one of our great partners in the world, and we appreciate them. We have 35 different partners around the world. These are the ones that are in Europe, and these are the others are ones that operate in different parts around the world. For those who complete all the Shingo workshops, we recognize them as being a Shingo alumni member, and here's some of the benefits that come from that, besides all the learning that you do that will help your companies get better over time. And I thought I would just close with a final Shingo quote. If we think things are going to be different from yesterday, we need to blaze new trails every day. That means every day we need to come with the opportunity to think differently. And with that, we're going to head to our Q&A. Let me go back to here.
Has the most delegates on this call?
Are you asking me?
Yeah. Yeah.
Ireland.
The answer is I don't know, but I guess it could be Mexico, actually, from listening.
Oh, really?
So we may have a number of may have a number of questions coming in from there. So what we'll do now is we've got a chance to ask Ken some questions. And this is usually the funnest part of these sessions, to really get into some depth and so forth. We not only have a lot of countries represented, we have quite a few of the affiliates on the call as well. We have several Shingo Prize companies or people that used to work there. So we have quite a experienced crew out there. So now's your chance to ask Ken some questions. So if you find the question box, please feel free to type in a question. While you're thinking, perhaps I'll start the ball rolling. So I'm going to sort of pitch this one as quite a hard question for you, Ken.
Okay, I'm ready.
My question is, a lot of companies that challenge for Shingo are part of large multinational organizations. Is it really possible to win a Shingo prize, or to get Shingo recognition at a single site if you haven't got the whole group company going in that type of direction?
It's possible, but it's a lot easier if you've got support from corporate. There's no doubt about it. We've seen organizations where there is a local leader who drives excellence and achieves great things. And usually when that happens, corporate recognizes it and then starts wondering, why is that place outperforming everywhere else in the world? And then they'll try to learn from that and then share it around the world. That's what a good leader would do. But sometimes, they have their own agenda and they don't care how an individual location is doing, and it may not fit in their agenda for their career advancement or whatever, and they don't support it either. One of the I'll just give Ireland as an example. One of the reasons why Ireland has been the leader in the world in Shingo award recipients is because of a concerted effort where the companies in Ireland got together, particularly the international companies in Ireland, got together. And I was talking to Dermot O'Neill once about what was it that was driving you to do together and sharing and benchmarking and studying together and then improving things together and all that. What drove you? And he said to me, relevance. I go, huh? What do you mean by relevance? He goes, most of our plants in Ireland may be part of a large international organization, but they're small plants relative to the overall organization. Mm-hmm. And they were all worried about, we're just going to get shut down because we're no more than a fraction of the overall enterprise. We had to find a way to stand out and be relevant to secure our jobs and secure the jobs of the people in the local company. And so relevance was important. We had to stand out some way, and so we decided we will make our plants the best performing plants in the world. And so a lot of the plants in Ireland did not have that support when they started. But then what happened is they became the best performing plants in the world. People started to take notice. And at the Shingo office, we get phone calls all the time, and there's more than a dozen times a call like this has happened where somebody calls up and says, we're so-and-so located in such and such a place. We want to be more like Ireland, or we want to be more like our Irish plant. Can you help us?
Very good, very good. So on that, before we started, I was just talking about the new book we're working on that Ken's kindly agreed to do the forward on, called Ireland, the Island of Excellence. So watch this space. We'll have some case studies for you. Anyway, we have some questions coming in, and my Mexican quip may be wrong because Maria says she's watching in, Maria Gonzalez says she's watching in Spain. So maybe some of my Mexicans are Spanish. Anyway, there's a question from Maria. How would you change the management team mindset when they're focused in the short to medium instead of the long term?
I gotta tell a funny story about this one too. In the mid 1980s, well, actually during the trip where Shingo came and received his honorary doctorate at our university, and we asked him if we could use his name to start the Shingo Prize. We also did a worldwide call-in, mostly people from the United States. Well, we did a call-in. It lasted about 4 hours, and we've got the videotapes from it. And this was 1988. And it was hilarious to watch the whole thing, because the first time I saw it, I just sat down and watched all 4 hours straight. And about a half hour into it, somebody asked almost exactly that same question. I'm struggling. I'm working hard to do great at my plant, but I'm having a difficult time getting my senior leaders, the senior executives, to buy in. Can you tell me how to get people to buy in? And he said, well, show them good results, and they'll come around. And then about a half hour later, somebody else asked the same question, almost identical question. And Shingo patiently says, show them good results, and you'll eventually get them to come around. And then it happened about 6 times throughout this 4 hour call. It was a broadcast, satellite broadcast, so there's video of it too. But almost 4 hours into it, somebody asked the same question the last time. And so I want you to know this is a problem that's been around for decades, and it's not a new problem. Shingo's answer to it was always the same, but by the time he got asked the same question for the 6th time, he kind of had lost his patience. And he goes, just show him the results. He kind of yelled it. So it reminds me a little bit of a movie scene, but
very good, very good.
Show him the results.
So we have a question from my friend Caroline over there in Ireland. So she says, well, thanks very much for the seminar. If you go back in time and give yourself, as a first-time manager, one piece of advice, what would it be?
Do systems better. Because as I come and become a student of the Shingo model and got involved with the research, I tried to be a good lean leader. For those who don't know my background, I studied Japanese management techniques. I wrote my master's thesis in my MBA on Japanese management techniques. I'd studied them as a student, and then I went to work for a Japanese company. And so I got to learn Kaizen, to use the Japanese term. I learned it firsthand within Japanese culture. I to a large extent, was on the front lines. I wasn't at Toyota, so I may not have seen the best of the best in the Japanese environment, but I learned a lot. And I tried to be a good leader. I tried to engage people as effectively as I could, and I achieved some pretty outstanding results over the course of my career in industry. But as I started studying the Shingo model and the companies that did even better than I ever did, the thing that I realized I was missing was a proper understanding of how systems drive behavior. And I wish I could go back and say, the problem with that was that we didn't, and truly, that's a true story about me not realizing why the particular system wasn't working, is because I hadn't built in a feedback or I use the term audit function. I was not tracking the system to find out whether it was accomplishing its purpose. And I didn't think about creating that audit or feedback system to inform me on a regular basis as to whether or not it's accomplishing its purpose and we're driving the right kind of behaviors. And I just go back, boy, if I could change one thing, I would take that back and learn it 30 years earlier, and it would have changed a lot of my results for the better.
Okay, very good. So we have a genuine Mexican person now. So we have Francisco, who's a Shingo alumni from Mexico. And his question is, what's the average time for a Shingo Prize recipient?
I'm not trying to understand. From the time they start their journey to the time they get to where they can be a recipient, or?
He doesn't say, but you could put that in if you.
Let me answer the question that way, and I'd say it totally depends upon where you start from and how responsive your organization is. I've seen examples of, well, let me give a good Mexico example. We had a Shingo Prize recipient, medical, located in Tijuana, and they were a greenfield operation. They started from scratch, but they hired a person who had a lot of experience with Shingo, who hired people with Shingo in mind. So he made sure he hired the right kind of people, had already developed before he hired them an excellent training system to get them to understand the culture of improvement, put up some terrific behaviors that he wanted to drive, and got his leadership team engaged in that. And they went from startup in 2015 to Shingo Prize recipient in 2019.
Okay, very good.
4 years.
So, yeah,
4 years from beginning to end to Shingo Prize level performance.
That's very impressive. So Francisco says yes from the start of the journey, and he says thanks. So I think you've answered the question. So that's great. So talking of the systems, one thing that I often talk about is having been a student of Toyota for many years, having started that in the mid-90s, spending time out in Japan. When I think of systems, you were talking about them Ken, and when I think of all the systems that happen in Toyota, the two systems that stand out to me as by far and away the most exceptional are the development of suppliers and the recruitment and induction of people. Which, if you think about it, are the two main inputs to actually make that plant, to make that company work. So you get the right inputs and you're going to get pretty good company.
Well, but I'll tell you a funny story about the history of Toyota, though, is they didn't worry about suppliers at all for the first 10 years of TPS, because they were focused entirely on their internal issues and figured if we don't solve our problems, we can't go and teach our suppliers. They always had the intent of working with their suppliers and making them part of the improvement solution, if you will. But they didn't even approach them about it until about 10 years into it. It wasn't until the late 60s. So they started their efforts on TPS formally in the mid-1950s, and that's when they hired Shingo to come help them the first time. It was in 1955. But they didn't really start doing anything with their suppliers till the late 60s. And now they have such an outstanding, and I'm going to use their term, Jishuken network that they've developed and use for training purposes, and they loan their senior executives out to help coach. Just an impressive development system for their suppliers, though. You're absolutely right on that. You've met Mr. Shingo, haven't you, Peter? That's what he spent most of his career doing, is developing those Jishuken groups.
Yeah, I actually came across Mr. Shingo in 1995 in the UK site when we started some work with him. And there was this little Japanese guy in the corner, and I started talking about Kurokukai. And he literally fell off his chair. What's this stupid foreigner, Gaijin, talking about this? Because he shouldn't know anything about this. Anyway, that's another story. So we got some more questions. So the next one is from Abraham. He says, what should be the first step to start with a culture change? I mean, we're about to start a massive lean implementation of our facility, and we're starting to listen to people and the implementation of a reward program for impactful ideas of people closest to the process.
It's the first step really depends upon where you're at. Let me give two contrasting examples. I would say the majority of the time when I go an organization that's just starting out and wanting to figure out how to do this and do it right, generally it's led by leadership who want to get better, but they don't have a clue of how to build the right kind of culture. And so the most important thing that I say, your first few steps need to be about building that right kind of culture. And so often that's the right place for them to start. But there are also times, there's a few cases, this is less frequent, but I just had one a couple weeks ago where it's a company that is consistently in best places to work and they have engaged employees, but they're just not very aligned, to be honest with you. Their improvements don't seem to move the needle on customer satisfaction. Their improvements don't seem to be achieving any kind of purpose. And as you talk to people, it becomes clear that the improvements that they make are not aligned to improve the overall organization, so they're not thinking systemically. And so my advice to them was, you've got to get this organization aligned and focused so that your engaged employees can actually do something that moves that needle. So it really depends upon where your organization is at as to where it makes sense to start first. Do you start at the top of the pyramid, or do you start at the bottom of the pyramid? And rarely have seen a situation where you start at the middle of the pyramid on the principles, but almost always it's either at the top or the bottom, depending upon whether your biggest problem is alignment and you've got a good engagement already, or you have no engagement. You've got to figure out how to build that kind of culture.
I think that's some good words. I mean, my own thought on that, Abraham, is, you're on the right lines of listening to your employees. And, if you start by saying to your employees, what are the top 3 things that we could do here to make this place better? And do nothing else for the first year or so than just work on some of those. That might be a good starting point. Because the key point is get the engagement of people by working on things that mean something to them. Could follow all the sort of things that Ken's been talking about.
May I ask, where's Abraham from? Do you know?
He's from Mexico. He's Abraham Rodriguez.
Abraham Rodriguez, okay.
So,
thank you.
Okay, so we have a couple of questions that are sort of similar here. So there's one from Mikhail and one from Sunil. And they're both asking about KPIs. So in order to drive and measure excellence, what KPI should leaders focus on? And Sunil talks about what would be 2 KPIs for culture change. So perhaps you can take those 2 together.
Okay, good. Well, I'm going to introduce a concept that we teach in our workshops, but I mentioned that ideal results require ideal behaviors. And the best of the best don't worry about KPIs as much as they worry about those behaviors. And we coined a way of describing those as key behavioral indicators, or KBIs. And so I want to make sure that there's an understanding that KPIs, if you focus on KPIs, you're only going to see the lagging. You're going to see the results, but you're not going to understand the inputs. And the KBIs are way more important than the KPIs. But sometimes it's hard to see the cause and effect relationship between a KBI and a KPI. And so I would say the key results that you want to measure are the KBIs, because those KBIs are the leading indicators, but you got to make sure you find the right ones. And I use that safety example because that's one that I've seen from organization to organization has proven to be effective. That if you are seriously worrying about people's safety, you address any safety concern anybody raises. You address any near miss that ever happens. You fix those things. You prevent the fire from happening, so to speak, by diligently making the workplace safer and safer and safer and safer all the time. And what will happen is that KPI will go down. The number of recordable accidents and days missed from work will change. And the same is true for your defects. The more you focus on eliminating, error-proofing to make sure that that kind of defect can never happen again, as you error-proof it, go through a poka-yoke process and make sure it can't ever happen again, that's how you systematically eliminate defects. And so I think the key thing, the first thing I want to say is focus on the behaviors and work hard to identify the behaviors that move that KPI needle. And yes, you need to track the KPI because you don't know whether the behavior is going to affect the needle or not until you actually start measuring the right thing and the needle starts to move. So with that said, employee engagement. As Shingo examiners, we typically look at, and this is, people measure different things because many organizations say it has to have a certain amount of impact before we count it as an idea. And other places, if it's any kind of an idea, even if they don't measure the impact of it, they just want to have ideas. And so the numbers vary a lot from organization to organization, but we always audit as Shingo examiners the engagement of the people, meaning how many people submitted ideas and implemented ideas or were involved in the implementation of the ideas. And to me, that is the key measure of employee engagement is, are they submitting ideas? Are they engaged? Are they involved in the implementation process? I often start a conversation as an examiner by going up to somebody and say, hey, can you tell me about the last improvement idea that you implemented? And you wouldn't believe how excited people get to share that, because it's something that they cared about and they did, and they're, oh wow, I get a chance to tell somebody about it. But you learn a lot about it if somebody says, I didn't know I was supposed to have an idea. Okay, that's really important to know. Or they say, other people have ideas, but I'm just not good at that. And that's okay, but it also shows they haven't quite reached the level of engaging everybody in the improvement process. And so it's fun to ask questions like that, because most of the times, 80% of the time or so, people will just, oh, I got to tell you about it, and they get really excited. And you'll learn a lot by how they describe the process they went through and the kind of improvement they made, and whether the improvement they made ties to the goals of the organization and helps them achieve their purpose in a better way.
Okay, good. So we sort of a bit running out of time now, but we have well, we have two questions. One more has just come in. So one here, I'm going to call you Geza. I'm not sure if the pronunciation is right, but sorry if that's not right. The question is, when do you realize that your systems are aligned in the best way to seek the ideal behaviors, and how is it possible to achieve it? It's not easy to create that sort of relationship.
So hopefully you've got a clear purpose, and you define some clear goals that the organization can achieve to help advance that purpose. And if you have that, then you can, every improvement that you have, it's helpful if you can tie it to that purpose. And I'll give the example of the organization that I consider to be best in the world. It's Autoliv, and we feature them in one of our videos. But every time I've ever visited Autoliv, and this is more than once a year, every year for the last 12 years, so 20 times or so in the last decade or so, I asked people that same question, tell me about your latest improvement. I have never failed to get an answer something along the following, well, we made this improvement, and that did this, and that did this, and that helps us, and this goes to their purpose, save life, because they make airbags for automobiles, and their purpose statement is we save lives. I've never had somebody answer the question without going through this detailed explanation of how the improvement they did tied back to this goal of we save lives. And to me, that is alignment. They have everybody thinking about what can we do? What can this change help save lives, and how can it get there? If it doesn't get there, we don't bother doing it.
Okay, very good. So we have one last question from Alfonso here. So his question is following up on the KBI conversation. Could you give some examples of KBIs that could be used?
Yeah, so defect elimination on a quality. How many defects have you addressed and error-proofed out? What are the error-proofing activities? You can measure the number of things you did. You could also measure the KPI, of course, is the defect level, but the behavior or the action that is the action taken of we eliminated this way of causing this defect, we eliminated this way of causing this defect. And I've seen some really phenomenal presentations by teams that have tackled a problem, and I'll just use an example of a facility, an auto electronics facility in China, where they got their cross-functional team together and systematically went through every possible cause and eliminated the way to do it, and over the course of a year reduced their defect level from a 60 ppm level to a sub 1 ppm level. I mean, just by, we're going to tackle this problem first, and sometimes they did Pareto charts to figure out which cause was the most common, but I mean, just really tackle the problem, and as a team, relentlessly went after eliminating every single defect. Now, if you measure that to me is a KBI, those actions. You measure how many different poka-yoke improvements did we make that will move that needle of our defect level. That's the kind of thing you want in a KBI, is something that will move the needle, though.
Very good. Well, time's against us, and we've come to the end of our allotted time. So I'd like to thank KEN